morning. So I fully realized this morning just how much technology has really made it, not only into this world, as Nancy just described, but certainly into medicine. How many of you came downstairs today, you're at a meeting in Boston, and not one, but actually two separate meetings on health technology in the same floor of the same hotel? Of course, I went to the wrong one. Got a little lost, had to be redirected, but we're here. It's here. And it can no longer be ignored. Why is that? Well, Nancy gave you the numbers, why technology is so important to health, but particularly to cardiovascular disease. Lives are at stake, millions of lives, a major killer. But so are dollars, which in part drives the world, sorry to say, but it's real. Look at these conditions: heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, the risk factors for disease, stroke. These are some of the major drivers of healthcare cost across this nation. So it is appropriate that we would spend some of our technology devoted to this concept of how can we change the game? How can we bring down cost? How can we improve quality? To do this, though, will require large solutions. Zubin Ipin and myself actually wrote this editorial talking about the idea that mobile technology and applications can, in fact, facilitate meaningful change on a global scale. Massive problems require pragmatic, scalable, and evidence-based solutions. Let's go through those. In part, pragmatic. It has to work for both ourselves as individuals as well as for our doctors and our health systems, else it isn't going to be adopted. It has to be scalable, so in part, as Nancy has already indicated, it's not just for the worried well or the rich, but for everyone. And it has to be evidence-based. This concept that, in fact, just because it's bright and it's shiny and it's clever doesn't mean it should be adopted. It really should be driven by the idea that it actually does something, that it changes behavior, that it helps people get healthier or helps us deliver health care when they need it. There's a lot of cool technology out there. Almost every part of our body now has something on it that it now is related back and can potentially contribute to better health. Our watches, our glasses, our alarm clocks. Yes, there are such things as alarm clocks, Anne-Marie. They kind of used to work, sit by the bedside, never mind. And the idea, even our Echo in our kitchen. Can you imagine? Echo, put ice cream on the menu. Eric, that's the third time you put that on this week. Do you really want to do that? Amazon knows a lot about what I do and don't do. And the power, both, as Nancy indicated, for good with that, or a little bit of creepiness, both exist. We need to use these tools to accentuate the good and avoid those things that are potentially challenging. The investment community absolutely has bought into this. There is huge potential here. And as you can see, almost $5 billion have been spent on this concept that technology in health may be the next big thing. It is also passed up now the investments that we're making in new devices. And if you think about that, the medical device industry, pretty huge. Now the investment in tech around it and mobile applications, much larger. But clever does not always trump evidence. Sorry, I couldn't avoid it. But this concept that we should use evidence to drive what we do. We've always done it in medicine. And just because something can be done doesn't mean it necessarily does it good, well, or helps in any way. Blood pressure is a prime thing. A patient came into my clinic, not this patient, but somebody came into my clinic and said, look, I've been monitoring my blood pressure at home using my phone. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like measuring her blood pressure. It's like off the scale, and she's like, it reads me 120/80 every time. I know how that works. But it's changing rapidly. Just in the last few months, the FDA has put out this announcement that, in fact, they're developing fast tracks to allow it easier barriers to get products to market, but products that have been proven to be effective. This is kind of a game changer. Or what about the other side of this, when actual technologies are being thought about not only by what they can do, some clever things, but that they empower a patient to be able to monitor their risk factors in their home, and then with the right coaching to actually change those risk factors in a way heretofore not been possible. Technology is amazing, but only when linked and backed by evidence. Let's talk about the traditional life cycle of innovation. Many ideas are out there, and very clever ones, and a lot of you around this table will talk about them over the next 24 hours. But not every idea actually addresses a problem. And in fact, it should be the problem driving the good idea as opposed to, hey, this is clever. So starting with good problems, unfortunately, that need solved, put together with good ideas. Then you need to have actually the product developed that is actually, as we talked about, pragmatic and scalable. That product then needs to be put into systems and tested to be sure that it actually has any impact. And then ultimately, those products that are shown to be effective have to be reimbursed and disseminated to the world. So we actually use those things. We can't wait 17 years like we have in everything else in medicine for a product to go from that early part to dissemination. Nancy talked about the fourth revolution. Well, it's about time in medicine we have that fourth revolution in terms of our product life cycle and development. We believe that the AHA can sit at the nexus of that bringing together of these various groups. Many of you in here are digital technology or application companies. As we mentioned, you need to have a clear case of why you're doing what you're doing, working with healthcare providers and even patients themselves to determine what it is they actually need, know their ecosystem that they work in and live in every day, generate the evidence to prove that your product works, and ultimately define the business case that somebody will pay for it at the end of the day. Patients themselves have to be engaged as active health partners. They need to know what's out there and then purchase based on evidence, not on the idea, again, that it's shiny and bright. And then they have to sustain the stickiness. This concept that, in fact, buying the Fitbit is great, wearing it beyond 3 months is pretty darn important. And that's the problem. Technology is flashy, and we get it, and then we jump to the next tool and the next cool watch. We need people to stick with these long term if we're going to actually make a difference in health. And then finally, us as clinicians have to be willing to consider new models of care. Some of these will be disruptive to what we traditionally have done, maybe even our own business model. But we're bright people. We ought to be able to adopt to new technologies to actually do what we're supposed to be. We're healthcare providers. We want to promote health. So if we can use technologies like we do every part of our lives, we actually could change things. But to do that, again, we're not going to abandon the idea that we need to know what works. And then we actually implement it routinely in our clinical practice and then fight for the reimbursement issues that we talked about are so important. As Nancy mentioned, the Heart Association, seeing where this vision was going, created a Center for Health Technology and Innovation. Bob Harrington, myself, Pat Waite, Pat Dunn, who's here, many others have come together to try to promote this idea of focusing the energies of the Heart Association on how can we stimulate and move forward technology. The idea of increasing engagement, ultimately to improve patient outcomes at the center, and then in part the triple threat, lowering costs. This center will in part be based on what are the core values of the Heart Association, which Nancy covered, but stem from science. The idea that in fact we will show and find what works out there. But in part, the Heart Association has become quite the organization to convene and bring together those groups that we talked about, patients, doctors, systems, regulators, the tech industry, ultimately driven to make better products and then find out if they work and then disseminate them. Ultimately driven by the idea of having impact. Drive into the marketplace those things that are proven to work through advocacy, education, and a national network. The center itself has multiple different pillars, and I'll just go through a few of these. It continues to evolve. We'll take your suggestions on how we can do better in the future. Partly, the center part, when it began, was just finding what was out there. There's a whole lot that's going on, and only if a young generation knows about it, and not some of us old people, not going to work. So in finding that and disseminating what's cool and different and new out there is pretty good part of the system. Secondly, it's the idea of actually creating a forum like this where we bring together the tech industry, physicians, people who are in healthcare delivery, ultimately to understand what are the issues, problems, and solutions on both sides of the street. We are partnering to actually develop new products, and I'll talk about that in a few seconds. Can we put AHA science inside the devices themselves rather than having, and then tech people concentrate on the cool part of how to use it, and we concentrate on the science part, not so fun, but ultimately important, to drive the best products to being developed. We want to speed the evaluation and implementation process. We want to, in part, define how this process can be improved as we go over in time. And ultimately, we want to guide the consumer. What is good, what is proven, in part so that those companies that have invested the money to make the difference will, in fact, get their proven products used successfully. Woo. This conference itself is part of this. It is an opportunity to bring together many people. It was the work of many people to actually get the conference together. I'd like to thank, at this point in time, the Healthcare Advisory Group. Each of you who are here, hopefully you get a chance to meet these individuals, really poured out a lot of time to try to come up with a clever conference, which we'll get to in a few minutes. I also like to thank the AHA staff who worked tirelessly to make this come together. It's a lot of work behind these conferences, and these guys have done a great job. Whoops. Also, as mentioned, at the scientific sessions this year, it's in Anaheim, right next to the Silicon Valley and the rest of the wonderful world of tech. We brought us to you this time. So we'll be out on the West Coast. It is a great opportunity for the mixing of the two worlds and cultures. At those meetings, we're going to devote an entire day from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. to tech. I'm very proud that this actually happened. And we have some of the tech giants, Dennis Schulman and James Balt actually came here today, which is phenomenal. Both these individuals from Microsoft and Qualcomm, along with Jessica Mega from Verily, will be giving keynote speeches at that talk. As a part of that day, it gives us an opportunity to actually carry out a Shark Tank, where new innovators have come forward and put forth their idea in a 5-minute pitch, and we sort of judge them and get some ideas back to these individuals. I will tell you that some of those products developed and identified during those first conferences, now 3 years into running, have actually developed into full-fledged companies in part through the help that they got from the Heart Association. Partnership between early companies and the Heart Association through conferences like themselves and the center itself have allowed us to better develop products, learn about each other's sides, and ultimately to improve where the system's going. If you have interest in any of these topics, Megan Gerges is in the back, could probably give you some advice on how you can work more closely with the Heart Association moving forward. Opportunities, though, in this realm exist on the idea, as we mentioned, of pulling in your technology tied to the digital health content that's already been developed by the Heart Association. That partnership will speed up the process and improve the science that's inside your product every time. Beyond, though, the technology itself, we're very clear, and we heard this even in yesterday's keynotes, that it's not just the product, but it's really the product tied to a behavior change. That's ultimately what we want to use, data or technology to drive behavior change. So understanding the motivations of either the patient or alternatively the healthcare provider is key to making a difference. And I think the Heart Association has years of actually doing those types of behavior changes in many realms, from quality improvement efforts to driving better CPR. One example of that, and this is our late breaker, Bob. Breaking news is that one company, Sidebar, who's here, and you may hear their product during the conference here, partnered with the Heart Association to develop a collaborative new application. This hasn't been even press release yet, so keep it confidential. It's only amongst a few of our friends. But it's a cool thing where it's actually using that idea of both a cool technology and a concept of behavioral modification to develop personalized application that will allow you to better manage your risk factors. What's neat about this technology is it's actually now going to be targeted to large health plans in somewhere in California. Can't exactly announce that yet either, but that health plan itself delivers care to over 60% Hispanic populations. So we are delivering it not just to the worried well in Boston, but to those individuals who in fact typically have been downtrodden in disparate groups. Hopefully we'll find out that this technology through this evaluation really is making a difference to change their lives. The idea that, in fact, any one of you can change the course of our group is shown very well here. One of the donors in California complained the idea that technology is dead. You guys move way too slow nowadays. Innovation isn't happening. The FDA stifles us. So through a large donation, he said, get together and understand where the ecosystem is going. Where have we gone with regards to both the failures and successes in cardiology in developing new innovations? Can we pull together business leaders and the next generation of researchers to find out why the system works or doesn't work, and use those lessons to drive faster innovations in the future? Just an example of where the center is going to try to build the science, but also speed the process. Final example I'll give you today is a partnership with the American Medical Association. You'll hear more about this through a subsequent talk, but it's an idea called Xterra. It's a joint effort, again, representing the collaboration of the Heart Association, not doing these things separate from other organizations, but working together to develop a certification process for new technologies that will, in part, help you as a consumer know what's good, what's not good, what are the things that really matter to a consumer, and then get that information out and disseminate it in a very trusted fashion. Overall, I just want to summarize and say the Heart Association has been a leader in many fields, but now devoted towards technology for the right reasons. This idea that we can make a difference in outcomes, speed the process, and bring down the cost. AHA is driven by the science. It has the reach, but it's really about the collaborations that matter. Hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you very much.